All right, welcome back, friends. Believe in Big Ten. I'm Rhett Lewis, and it is a great pleasure to welcome the lead college football analyst for college football on Fox, host of the Joel Klatt Show, the one and only Joel Klatt. Joel, pleasure to be here with you, man. Obviously, we get to hang out a bunch during draft season, a little bit crossover here and there during college football season, but you know what a fan I am of your work. And then the last piece of this, and the first thing that I have to say to you is, amen, brother. Amen. You have been up on the mountaintops shouting for equality in college football, in the college
Yeah,
football playoff. And I
yeah,
thank you for it, not just because of what I got on the wall behind me, but because this is why we have a 12-team playoff, Joel. It's so that we can
yeah.
play this thing out on the field, man.
I agree. I bristle at this idea that just because of narrative, some other conference can demand a spot for a 3-loss team over a 1-loss team. That's not a thing when you only play 8 conference games. It's total insanity. And I just think that the committee has not viewed Indiana properly. There is clearly two things going on with their latest ranking at 10, behind 10, right? Behind SMU,
Yep.
which is number one, recency bias. If both of those teams lose their games, BYU or Ohio State, one of these is not like the other. So their loss is not the same. Indiana has been more dominant over the bulk of their schedule than what SMU has been over their schedule. And you look at the fact that you look up at this point and Indiana has a strength of schedule that's tougher than SMU based on,
The Ohio
all
State
this
game.
strength of schedule stuff. And so I'm looking at this and I'm like, I'm sorry. Why are they ranked behind SMU? It doesn't make any sense. But again, the playoff committee is it's such a it's a mess. I wish that we had a better system of ranking teams, but we don't. And right now, the recency bias and the brand bias against Indiana is hurting them. But I'm cautiously optimistic that where they're at right now, no one's going to pass them from behind. They're still going to have an ACC team lose in front of them. So from that standpoint, I think Indiana is in a good spot, but I don't want to guarantee anything.
No doubt. And look, I said it after the Michigan game. I thought, at that point, like that was it. That was the ticket to me. It was after that Michigan game and after that win, because you were going to be, look, I think we're all kind of forecasting a win, against Purdue, and that's still got to happen. This is a rivalry game. Get all that. Like you got to get past the rival there, but Purdue, as you know and have seen, is down in a bad way. And so I do expect Indiana to win that game. But even like outside of IU, like when you look at the Big Ten as a whole, you look at the teams that are in the top, that are in the CFP top 12, there is not a bad loss among them. Count the
No.
bad losses among the teams in the SEC that are
Yeah.
one above Indiana and
Yeah.
that are just in the top 12 in general. Like
Yeah, so
we're
think
forgetting
about
that.
like losses to 7-loss Kentucky and 5-loss Oklahoma, getting housed by Oklahoma. Alabama gets housed by Oklahoma. Oklahoma was 1-5 in their previous 6 games against FBS opponents. Like how is that a quality
Now
when,
they're a breath away from getting in.
yeah, it doesn't make any sense. I understood the the idea of benefit of the doubt for some of the top tier SEC teams if they were just losing to each other.
Yep.
Okay. Like I kind of understand that. But you lose the benefit of the doubt as soon as you dip down and you start losing to Auburn and Kentucky and Arkansas and Florida and Oklahoma, all of these 5, 7, 6, 4 loss teams. You lose the benefit of the doubt at that point. And yet to see Alabama like within a whisker of possibly getting into the playoff to me is wild with the way they got their doors absolutely blown off against Oklahoma.
Yeah, and then to go back, I think people, you box score scout, the IU Ohio State game, you see a 23-point margin or whatever it was, and you're like, oh, this is what we thought, right? Well, look, I mean, they gave up 14 points on punt, which you eloquently detailed on the Joel Klatt show. Now, look, the pressure package has got them in a big way, right? I
Yep.
mean, the offensive line was overwhelmed. Offensively, they just had a hard time dealing with it.
You know who was overwhelmed in their first top 5 matchup of the year? Georgia. And they fell down huge to Alabama. Do you know who didn't succeed in their first top 5 matchup of the year? Ohio State.
Yeah.
And these are teams that like live in these environments year in and year out. Okay. And what we saw from their first opportunity to their second opportunity was each Georgia and Ohio State got better. And in their second top 5 matchup, they had a much different outcome. Georgia beat Texas, Ohio State beat Penn State. Indiana hadn't done this since 1968.
My dad was in school then.
Yeah. And like, they had players that had never even sniffed an environment like this. And they will be better because of last Saturday. Their punt team will be better because of last Saturday. Their coaching staff will be better because of last Saturday. Curtis Rourke will be better. They get to go back and fix things just like Georgia and Ohio State did. This idea that all of a sudden that this was the period at the end of the sentence for the IU Hoosiers is just wrong. It's totally wrong. They're going to be better because of this. Now, I don't think that they're going to host a playoff game. And maybe, maybe nor should they with the easier or more favorable side of the schedule that they've gotten inside of Big Ten play. But having said that, like this team has been totally dominant in their 10 wins, completely dominant. And I don't want people to lose that fact. They had won those games by an average of 30 points, which was the highest margin in the country to that point. So this is, and by the way, in the fourth quarter when they scored the touchdown, before Ohio State scored that late one, they score a touchdown. Without the punt team, it's like a 3-point game. It's a one possession game at that time. So they held Ohio State to their lowest yards of the season, 316 yards. Everyone wants this to be some sort of indictment against Indiana. I'm failing to see it.
Yeah, same. And not just because of what I got on the wall. I mean, like, you read that and you watch that and I think if you wanted to put Indiana out of the CFP, you were going to view that a certain way. Right. I mean, that's just the way it was going to go. That's for sure. Okay. I do want to look at a couple other teams here. And before we get to where you're going to be back in Columbus this week for the big game against Michigan, Penn State up at number 4, and kind of similarly to, Indiana. I mean, Minnesota's a good football team, and I think people need to understand that fact too. I've seen them in person a couple of times now, and that was a tight game. But Penn State did what it had to do to win. Outside of that, I mean, their biggest resume marker was a loss to a really good Ohio State team and a close loss at that point. How do you view Penn State's kind of upward mobility within the CFP as they're currently constructed?
Yeah, I don't know if they've got upward mobility, but I certainly believe that if they take care of business this week in their finale, that they're going to be a hosting team. They're going to have a home game in the college football playoff, and that is a great place to be for a team that's likely going to be in cold weather with 100,000 seats in your stadium in an environment that can match any environment in college football. So I really love where Penn State is at. I really do. They had, I think, a really good season. They failed in that game, okay? And they've done that before. But I will tell you, again, like IU, if they can learn from that loss, and more in particular, not go away from their stars, but lean into their stars in the biggest moment of games, which we've seen, by the way. Think about the boldness that we've seen from James Franklin, not only in terms of who's touching the ball, but just the play calls. 1-point game in your own territory, and he's faking punts. I mean, he's been bold, very bold. Tyler Warren has touched the ball quite a bit. Singleton has touched the ball quite a bit. I'm bullish on Penn State, and I think that they're going to get it, not only get into the playoff, but they're going to host a first-round game, and I think they're going to win it.
And that would be huge for James Franklin, who has obviously struggled with those games against Ohio State and Michigan in years past. But to use this 12-team playoff for good that way would be such a huge boost as this program tries to get back into a national title type of conversation. But right now in the Big Ten, that belongs to Oregon and Ohio State, 1-2 in the CFP. And obviously, we're moving towards a potential rematch in the Big Ten title game, as long as what everyone expects to happen does happen this week in the final week of the regular season. And as you look at Oregon, and we had them in week 1 on Big Ten Network, and this is so far from the team right now that they were in week 1. I love how Dan Lanning's team grows, right? And they talk about connections so much, and it's certainly benefited them through some of those kind of, obstacles and tougher points throughout the season. I feel like they're a juggernaut if they can stay healthy here, Joel, and that's the caveat to me. Jordan Burch, Tez Johnson, where do we stand there? And so as you look at Oregon with that in mind, how do you see, their path to a national championship?
They are balanced. They are explosive and yet physical. They've got great defense and great offense. They can win games in different ways. That's what it takes at the top end. This is why I like Ohio State so much, because they have answers. You know, you can drag them into any style of game, and they probably feel like they've got enough answers to go out there and compete and possibly win that game. And that's why those two teams, I think, are the best two teams in the country. I think that, you know, we're likely to see that rematch. And what I find fascinating, and I know that this is not really your question, but the fascinating part for me is what would you rather have, the 5 seed or the 1 seed
that's right.
in the college football playoff? Because I'll just paint it to you this way. The way that the bracket turned out this week in the rankings, the 5 seed, let's just say Ohio State were to lose again to Oregon and get the 5 seed. Then they would face a home game against Arizona State and then possibly a neutral site against Boise State. So that's 2 games, 8 quarters against Arizona State and Boise State. Or you can win the game in the Big Ten championship over Oregon and get a bye and face potentially Georgia. So would you rather play 8 quarters against Arizona State and Boise State or 4 quarters against Georgia?
Yeah,
I think that answer is pretty obvious.
Right. For sure. With respect to Ashton Genty and what Kenny Dillingham's doing at Arizona State. But yeah, physically, I think that's an easy question to answer at this point for Oregon. Last question that I have for you, Joel, is on the game that you're going to be at again with the big noon kickoff. And look, Michigan, we know it. It's been a down year compared to where they were a year ago, certainly, but compared to where they've been for the last, 5 or so years. Offensive line, has had their issues. Quarterback obviously has been the biggest part, but still, this is an NFL defense, right? You got first-round picks all over the place there. How do you see their path to trying to play spoiler against this uber-talented Ohio State team on both sides?
So it's likely going to be in the mid-20s and windy. So that could possibly negate some of the skill on the outside that Ohio State has throwing the football. That's why I think their best matchups are. And because the best matchup that Michigan has in the entire game is their defensive line, the interior of their defensive line against the remade interior of the Ohio State offensive line. Remember, Carson Hinsman moves to center. You've got Saraveld at guard. That is, they played well against Indiana, but that's a patchwork, right? Losing Seth McLaughlin, who's an All-American caliber center, is a big deal, in particular when you're about to see Kenneth Grant and Mason Graham on that interior. So it comes down to what it's come down to for the last 3 years and really, throughout its history in this matchup, which is line of scrimmage play. And whoever is going to be able to establish the run and sustain the running game controls the tempo and the pace of the game and controls the game overall. And when you can do that, like Michigan has done for the last 3 years, you end up winning. Now, that's my biggest question is like, can Michigan's defensive line just completely stop the run game of Ohio State? Because maybe external factors are going to limit their ability to throw the football, like the wind and the cold weather. And then it's about trying to gain a short field, trying to do something to sustain some of that offensive success that Michigan had in that 50-point really explosion against Northwestern and their ability to try to score points. It's not a game that favors Michigan in any stretch of the imagination. But in the one advantage that they do have, like D-line against O-line of Ohio State, you've got to not only maintain that, but dominate there. So to me, the entire game for Michigan rests in the hands of those two big defensive tackles.
Indeed, and that's an okay place to be, right? Because they are among the best that we've seen in college football, and certainly in this conference. Joel, always a pleasure, man. Always a great time getting a chance whenever I can. Whenever we're not on at the same time, to get a chance to watch you and Gus and Jenny on the big noon. I love the atmosphere. I love the environment of a noon kick, and I especially love getting to celebrate a win. Right, all day long. Okay, if you're that fortunate after the noon kicks, and we look forward to it again this weekend from Columbus. Thank you, buddy.
You bet. Good to see you, bud.